They say the wind never stops in the desert, but that morning, it did. There was no whisper in the sagebrush, no buzz from the flies, no breath from the mountains, only silence. And in that silence, the girl dangled. A twisted piñon tree leaned against the sky like a crooked finger pointing at God, and from its bent limb, an Apache girl hung by the shoulders. Rope looped under her arms, not her neck. Her body was limp, her long black hair hiding most of her face, but not the bruises, not the blood. And around her neck, tied with rusted barbed wire, was a wooden sign. Burned deep into it, with crude, uneven strokes, were 5 words. White man never forgets. They weren't just letters, they were a curse, a sentence carved into flesh and wood. Her head drooped forward. Her bare feet brushed the dirt like they were too tired to touch it. That's when he saw her, the rancher. He hadn't come that way in weeks. He didn't plan to that day either. But his horse, a bay gelding with a silver blaze, stopped without being asked, stopped cold and stared. The rancher raised his eyes and froze. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Her chest moved in tiny, broken shudders. But the desert didn't give second chances. Not here. Not after what that sign meant. The sun was directly above, hot and pale like a watching god. Buzzards circled high. But none dared land. He stayed in the saddle, unmoving. Maybe he was waiting for her to die so he wouldn't have to choose. Maybe he wasn't waiting at all, just remembering. Because the last time he saw a sign like that was 20 years ago, burned into the side of a barn after 3 mixed-blood children were found nailed to it. And now here it was again. That same handwriting, that same hate. White man never forgets. He swallowed hard. She was no more than 15, maybe 16. Small frame, bones too visible, skin scorched in places. Her dress was torn cotton, once sky blue, now painted in blood and dust. The rope around her chest had been tied with practiced cruelty, not to kill but to humiliate. And the sign wasn't just a message for her, it was bait, a challenge, a mirror. The rancher looked around. No wagon tracks, no hoof prints, just an empty trail in the dirt, and the feeling that something wicked had passed through. Smiling, he pulled a flask from his saddlebag, uncorked it, and didn't drink. Just stared at it, as if the whiskey might have answers. He thought about riding on, about letting the desert decide, but the wind still hadn't returned. Not a single leaf moved. Not a sound came from the hills. Only her. Only that ragged breath, like someone breathing through glass. It would have been easier if she'd been dead. Easier to forget. To ride away and pretend he never saw it. To say the desert took her. Like it takes everyone eventually. But her hand twitched. Just once, a small, trembling movement like she was waving at life as it passed by. And something inside him cracked. It wasn't pity. It wasn't duty. It was memory. Something about her, the way her shoulders hunched, the way her chin rested like it had given up, reminded him of someone. Not a face, not a name, just a feeling. A girl he once knew who never got to grow up. His boot touched the dirt, 1 step down, then 2. His spurs didn't jingle. Even they were quiet, like the earth itself held its breath. He moved slowly toward the tree. Past a dried-up patch of buffalo grass. A rabbit skull watched him from under a rock. She still didn't look up. But now he was close enough to smell the blood, not fresh-dried, cooked in the sun. He reached up, touched the barbed wire holding the sign. It bit him. Drew a line of red across his thumb. He didn't flinch, didn't curse, just stared at the words again. White man never forgets. It was burned too deep to scrape off. The wood was thick, heavy, a message meant to last. The rope holding her sagged under her weight. He reached into his belt, drew his skinning knife. It caught the light like a promise. For a moment, his hand hovered, because cutting her down meant more than saving her life. It meant claiming her, owning her pain, taking on the curse that sign carried. And once he cut that rope, He'd never be able to pretend again. He'd never ride past this road without hearing the silence, without seeing that crooked tree. He'd become part of the story someone else had written in blood. His fingers trembled. He looked up. Her eye just one opened, barely, dark as coal, hollow as winter, and for 1 second she saw him. She saw everything. Then she passed out, and he cut the rope. As she collapsed into his arms, the wooden sign swung free, scraping the tree bark behind it. The words faced outward, still cursing, still burning. He didn't drop it. He didn't tear it off. He carried her. And the sign. Both. There's a difference between cutting someone down and lifting them up. The first is survival. The second is a choice. He didn't look back at the tree, didn't need to. That image was burned into him now, her small frame dangling, the blood at her ribs, the sign twisting in the heat. White man never forgets. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, but she didn't feel light. She felt like every grave he'd ever seen dug too early. The barbed wire scraped his wrist. The wooden sign knocked against his knee as he carried her. He could have tossed it, left it behind, but his hands wouldn't let go, because it wasn't finished yet. His horse snorted, uneasy. The desert was starting to breathe again, wind creeping in slow, like a wounded animal, the kind that knew what had happened there and didn't want to get too close. He set her gently across the saddle, draping her limp arms around the horn like a rag doll. Then he climbed up behind her, one arm steadying her weight, the other guiding the rein. They rode east, toward nothing, no town, no post, just his land, 72 acres of silence and ghosts. The ride took 4 hours. She didn't wake, didn't speak, just lay against him, every breath shallower than the last. Flies followed, so did the buzzards. He didn't swat them away. Let them watch, let them know that whatever had hung her was done now. He kept the sign, tied it behind the saddle, where it knocked against the horse's flank like a cursed metronome. Over and over, white man never forgets. The words didn't fade, the blood on them didn't dry. They got worse, like it was sweating through the wood. At dusk, the cabin appeared half swallowed by willows, the roof bowed, the porch tilted, a house built by hands that once believed in permanence. He swung off the horse, cradled her again. His boots crunched gravel as he carried her across the porch, past the wind chime made of silver spoons, through the door that didn't lock anymore. Inside, everything stood still. The same table, the same rocking chair, the old iron stove with its mouth open like it wanted to speak. He laid her on his cot. She moaned once high and weak, like a baby rabbit dreaming of wolves. He knelt beside her, peeled the blood-soaked dress from her shoulder. The wound wasn't fresh, but the message was, carved into her skin with something dull. A shape, not letters, not words. A feather, maybe. Or fire. He didn't ask, didn't touch it, just stared. Then quietly, he walked to the sink, filled a cracked bowl with water from the rain barrel, and soaked a cloth. The water turned pink, then red. He returned to her, wiped the blood away. Every stroke was gentle, slow, careful. As if any sudden move might wake the dead, the fire came last. He lit it not for warmth, but for light, the kind of light that makes shadows bigger, that stretches pain across the walls. She opened her eyes for the second time, didn't speak, didn't blink, just looked at the ceiling, at the cracks, at the bird nests tucked in the rafters. He sat in the corner, elbows on knees, watching her watch the room. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, didn't need to. He knew what had been done, and he knew the silence that followed those kinds of wounds. She tried to sit up, failed. Her body gave out and fell back against the cot, but her eyes, those stayed open. She saw him now. She saw the knife he'd used to cut her down, lying on the table. She saw the wooden sign propped by the door, words still bold. He waited for her to scream, to flinch, to curse, but she didn't. Instead, she lifted a trembling hand and pointed not at him, not at the knife, but at the sign, and then she turned her face to the wall. The rancher stood, took the sign outside, propped it against the well. He stared at it one last time, then took the butt of his rifle and shattered it, over and over, until the wood split, until the words couldn't be read, until the curse bled into the dirt. Then he left the pieces there, didn't burn them and didn't bury them. Some things needed to rot in open air. He came back inside, closing the door behind him with a slow creak. She hadn't moved, but her eyes were closed again. This time, not from pain, from rest, from something approaching safety, and that more than anything frightened him, because it meant she was still alive enough to feel it. As the fire crackled low, he took her hand not to hold it, but to clean it. The back of her wrist bore a scar shaped like a bird with no wings. He paused, cloth dripping. Unsure what it meant, she didn't open her eyes, but her fingers closed faintly around his, as if to say not yet, but maybe. And some people come back loud, screaming, fighting, clawing at life like they're owed something. But she came back quiet, one breath at a time. Her lips cracked, her eyes half-lidded, but each time he pressed the wet cloth to her mouth, she drank barely but enough, like a ghost learning to be human again. He boiled water over the stove. The kettle hissed like it was angry. He filled a bowl, cooled it, then sat beside her. His hands moved slow, circling the edge of the basin as if afraid the water might judge him. She flinched when the cloth touched her collarbone, so he paused, waited until her breathing slowed again, then gently continued, dabbing the blood, softening the dried streaks down her chest. His fingers were calloused, but his movements, they were all mercy. No questions, no sounds, just care. She had no shoes. Her soles were burned and blistered, cracked open in places where the skin had split from walking too far. He brought out a jar of pig fat, something he hadn't touched since his wife died, dipped 2 fingers in, rubbed it into her feet with the tenderness of a man polishing glass. She didn't pull away, didn't make a sound, but she opened her eyes, and for the first time, looked directly at him. They stared at each other. Longer than they should have. He wasn't sure what she saw in him. A man too old to matter, a stranger in a land that hated her. The one who found her too late. Or maybe she didn't see anything at all. Maybe she was just measuring whether he'd be the next one to hurt her. And in that long silence, she blinked slowly once. A signal. Not of trust, but of exhaustion. He reached for her hand again, turned it palm up, counted 3 more scars on her wrist, one shaped like a thorn, another like a crooked T, the last a smudge of ink, half faded, like someone once tried to write her name there and gave up halfway. He didn't ask what they meant, didn't try to guess. She closed her fingers around the empty air, gently curling them into a fist, not in anger, but like she was holding something only she could feel. He gave her a blanket, worn wool, frayed at the edges, tucked it around her shoulders, one fold at a time, until she looked less like a victim and more like someone still here, alive. The fire crackled lower. He made her tea, just hot water, salt, and one thin slice of dried apple he found in the bottom of a tin. Set it on the table beside her without a word. She stared at it for a long time, then sat up, took the cup in both hands, and drank. A slow, careful sip. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect it. But when she finished, she set the cup down with trembling hands and deliberately turned it upside down. Not spilled, just placed. Like a gesture, like punctuation. The message was clear. That's all for now. The next morning, he woke to find her standing by the door, not leaving, just looking. At the broken sign he'd left outside, the pieces of it, she didn't touch them. Didn't step forward, just stood there barefoot, blanket still wrapped around her, staring. He approached from behind, slow, waited beside her. The silence was thick between them. Then she raised her hand just one finger and pointed at the largest fragment of wood. The piece with only one word left on it. Forgets. He nodded once, Not because he understood, but because that word had been staring at him too. Later that day, he gave her space, sat on the porch, oiling his saddle, watching the dust roll across the prairie. He didn't glance back when he heard the door creak open, didn't speak when her feet padded across the wood behind him. But when she sat down beside him, folding her legs under herself like a child would, he exhaled. Not relief, something deeper, something like recognition. They sat like that for an hour. No words, just two people who didn't know how to speak anymore. At some point, she reached into her blanket and pulled something out, a small lump wrapped in deer hide. She opened it. Inside were 3 pieces of charcoal. She took one, turned to the cabin wall, and began to draw. Lines, curves, careful, controlled. A bird, not flying, not caged, just sitting, perched on a crooked branch, one wing missing. The rancher didn't ask. But she knew he saw, because when she was done, she turned the charcoal sideways and shaded the empty wing with soft, smoky strokes. The missing part, the wound, the symbol. That night, he stared at the bird she'd drawn on his wall. Its one-winged silhouette trembled in the firelight like it wanted to fly but didn't know how. In the middle of the night, he woke suddenly, no sound, no nightmare, just the image of the same bird painted across her back. She didn't speak for 4 days, not with words, but her hands told stories. On the 4th morning, he found the second bird on the cabin wall, drawn in charcoal just like the first. This one faced the opposite direction, and both its wings were there, but crooked, as if it had been broken once and never healed right. She stood beside it, barefoot, hair still tangled like barbed wire. The blanket had been traded for one of his shirts, too big. Sleeves rolled to the elbows. She'd cuffed them neatly. He didn't speak, just watched her press the charcoal gently to the wood, finish the tail feathers, and then wipe her fingers on her hip. She turned to him, met his gaze, then slowly lifted the hem of the shirt, not in shame, not in seduction, in testimony. Across her back, from shoulder blade to hip, someone had painted a bird, not with ink, but with fire. The scars formed outstretched wings, feathered, jagged, ugly in places, beautiful in others. A phoenix maybe, or an eagle, but broken. The breastbone was charred so deep it had never faded. Around the edges, newer burns, the kind used for branding, flanked each wingtip like shackles. She let him see, then lowered the shirt. That was her story, not told in names or places, but in images, symbols, wounds. He sat down slowly on the edge of the cot, as if her silence might collapse under too much weight. She remained standing, back to the wall, eyes lowered. He said nothing, just reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small wooden carving, an old keepsake. It was a sparrow, whittled poorly, beak too big, wings too short, something he'd made when he was a boy before the war, before the cattle, before the dust. He placed it on the windowsill. She looked at it for a long time, then nodded, not approval, but recognition. Later that day, while gathering firewood near the edge of the arroyo, he found something in the dirt, a piece of jewelry, a child's earring, copper, bent into the shape of a feather, still stained with dried blood. He didn't tell her he'd found it, didn't ask if it was hers, just carried it in his pocket the rest of the day. Rubbing his thumb over its edge, he thought about the tree, the one where he found her, and how the sign had hung from her like a sentence passed down generations before either of them were born. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the ridgeline, she painted the third bird. This one faced the door. It had no eyes, no feet, just wings, and beneath it, a small dark smudged charcoal so thick it almost looked like blood. He stepped closer. She stepped aside. He reached up, ran his fingers across the smudge. It wasn't part of the bird. It was something beneath it. A mark, like a body, like a shadow the bird couldn't escape. And above it, in faint strokes, she'd drawn the top of a tree, the piñon tree, the one she hung from. He turned to her. "What was the sign for?" he asked, voice hoarse. It was the first question he'd spoken aloud. She didn't answer right away, didn't turn, but she reached up and touched her own throat, then pointed toward the sign fragment still lying outside, then tapped her chest. Once, twice, as if the message hadn't been meant for her, but through her, that night. The wind howled. It scraped the walls like fingernails, blew ash from the hearth, rattled the door. He bolted it anyway. She didn't sleep, sat up near the fire, knees hugged to her chest, eyes trained on the glowing embers. He watched her from the cot, watched the way her shadow danced on the wall behind her, right beneath the bird, near midnight. She finally spoke. 3 words, barely above a whisper. They called me Sky, not a name, a sentence, a memory, a scar. He repeated it once, just to feel the weight of it. Sky. She nodded, didn't elaborate, didn't need to. It was enough. In the pre-dawn silence, as the fire dimmed, Sky moved to the wall, pressed her palm beneath the bird's wing, and left a faint, sooty handprint beneath it. He rose to bring her a blanket, but when he returned, she was already asleep in his chair, the sparrow carving cradled in her lap. The first time he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. But she didn't hold it either, just let his fingers brush hers while passing a bowl of beans across the table. And in that soft, almost invisible contact, something old and aching stirred between them. Not lust, not need, just the quiet miracle of being seen. He didn't speak of it. Neither did she. In the Wild West, love didn't come with declarations, it came with actions, with patience, with food left warm, with horses saddled before dawn, with a shirt sewn without asking. Sky moved around the cabin like a shadow made of breath. She never walked loud, never touched things without purpose. But when she swept the floor, she hummed. And when she cooked on the few days she chose to, she stirred with her eyes half closed, as if every motion was an apology to someone no longer living. He built her a proper chair, something small, with a low back and rounded arms, not because she asked, but because he noticed how she folded herself too tightly on the one he used. When he showed it to her, she didn't smile, just sat in it, ran her fingers along the smoothed edges, and whispered something in Apache he didn't understand but felt. It sounded like stay. Outside, the days passed in gold and dust. Inside, something impossible unfolded, and they didn't kiss. They didn't touch much. But their silences grew shorter, their meals longer, their glances deeper. One night, she reached across the table and wiped honey from his chin with the side of her thumb. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't meant to be. But it wrecked him. Because no one had touched his face in 8 years. Not since his wife died. Not since the war left his insides knotted and his heart a locked door. Sky didn't try to open that door. She just sat near it, waited, and with every brush of her hand against the table, every glance toward the birds on the wall, she left tiny keys beneath the floorboards of his ribs. He carved her a new bird, smaller than the first, more detailed. He gave it 2 whole wings, tucked them close to the body so they wouldn't look like they'd fly away. When he handed it to her, she took it in both hands, held it against her chest like a prayer, and whispered the word home. But even beauty doesn't escape the West for long. They found the earring, the one he'd hidden. Sky spotted it on the windowsill, where he'd forgotten it after cleaning his coat. Her breath caught when she saw it. She didn't speak, but her fingers went to her ear, touched the place where its twin used to be. And then her body folded, not collapsed, folded like grief was pressing down from the ceiling and she was curling to stay beneath it. He tried to explain. I found it near the arroyo. Didn't know if it was yours. She didn't answer. Just held the earring in her palm, stared at it like it was made of fire. That night, she didn't draw a bird. She erased one, took a wet cloth and wiped away the one with broken wings, left only the faint ghost of its outline behind. He asked why. She turned to him. And for the first time, she looked angry. Her voice cracked when she said it, because we don't all get to fly. Then she turned her back and curled beneath the blanket, leaving him standing in a room that suddenly felt too full of walls. The next morning, he made coffee, poured 2 cups, set hers on the table like always. She didn't touch it, just stared out the window at the prairie, her hand still cradling the earring. He sat beside her, spoke carefully. "I never knew you before the tree. I don't need to," he added. She didn't blink, but she whispered, "They will." He asked who she answered. The men who made the sign. He hadn't asked about them, not until now. But the words came out like gravel. Who were they? She exhaled, didn't turn. 3 men. One was my uncle by marriage. One wore a Union coat. The last had a cross burned into his hand. He froze. Cross burned into his hand. He knew that man. He'd branded it himself, long ago, after a raid gone wrong. A mercenary preacher with blood on his tongue and a Bible with missing pages. "He's still alive?" the rancher asked. Sky nodded. "They're coming back. Not for me." She looked at him now. "But for you, because you cut me down." They stared at each other, not in fear, but in acceptance. The West never let love go unpunished, especially not love like theirs. Not when it crossed bloodlines, not when it healed what hate tried to finish. That night, they sat side by side, closer than usual. No words, just their shoulders touching. A storm rolled in beyond the hills, lightning flashing in silence, like the sky was watching. He reached for her hand again. This time, she held it. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Sky leaned her head against his shoulder. Her eyes were open, but her voice was distant when she whispered, "If they come for me, don't let them hang me twice." He didn't reply, just squeezed her hand tighter. Outside, the storm began to walk. The storm didn't pass. It just circled, like a wolf waiting for weakness. By dawn, the sky bled gray. The cabin smelled of wet wood and regret, the kind that rises before the first shot is fired. Sky was already dressed. One of his old coats, sleeves rolled, her hair tied back with a leather string. He didn't ask where she was going, and she didn't say, but they both knew. It ended where it started, at the tree. He saddled both horses. She rode the smaller mare, the one that used to buck until Sky whispered to it. Now it moved only when she did, like her bones had become command. The ride was quiet. No birds, no coyotes, no wind. Even the buzzards had left. The path to the piñon tree hadn't changed. Same twisted bark, same broken branch where she once hung. But someone had returned. The sign was back, new wood, same words. White man never forgets. Fresh blood dripped from the letters, still warm. 3 men stepped from the brush, same filth, different faces. The preacher was there, older, now with a full beard and a hollow stare. A burn scar shaped like a cross bloomed across his palm. The other 2 were drunk on their own history. One wore a hat with a Confederate pin. The other grinned like he already tasted the killing. Sky didn't flinch. She got off her horse slowly. Didn't draw, didn't cry. Just looked at them like they were graves that hadn't been filled yet. The preacher spat in the dirt. "You dragged that thing off the rope, rancher." Didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask why she swung. You should have left her like God did. The rancher didn't speak, didn't blink. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver, but not yet. The preacher stepped forward. "She's not yours. She ain't anybody's." He raised the sign, walked toward Sky, held it like a sword made of shame. "I wrote this for every white man who ever forgot what they lost in the war, for every one of us that bled while her kind stayed hiding in the hills." Sky didn't move, didn't run. She just whispered, "You branded me with memory. I came back with fire." And she reached into her coat, pulled out the broken sparrow carving, the one he'd given her. She held it up and dropped it into the dirt. The preacher stared, confused. That's when the rancher moved. He didn't fire first. He waited for the others to draw. Only when the one with the Confederate pin lifted his rifle did the rancher shoot 2 rounds, one in the chest, one in the eye. The second man lunged for Sky. She didn't run. She sidestepped silent, precise, and shoved the sign into his gut like a spear. The sharpened corner sank deep. He gasped, fell, bled over the words. White man never forgets. The preacher stood alone now and shook. You don't know what she is, he hissed. She's the curse. The rancher stepped forward, blood spattering his boots. She's the only thing that made this land breathe again. The preacher raised his hands, not in surrender, in prayer, but his mouth stuttered. No verses came, no God replied. Only Sky. She walked to him, calm, slow, held out her arm, revealed the branded wings on her back. Your fire didn't kill me, she said. It built me. Then she dropped to one knee, dug her fingers into the dirt, and unearthed something. The original sign. Still splintered, still ugly. She handed it to the rancher. He didn't ask what to do. He knew. They tied the preacher to the tree. Didn't kill him, didn't carve him. They made him wait. Same branch, same silence, same windless heat. And above his head. They nailed the sign again, but Sky had changed it. With charcoal and blood, the words now read, White man learns. They didn't look back. Didn't need to. Some reckonings aren't loud. They're just done. The horses walked slow on the way back. Sky's head tilted to the wind, breathing in something new, something clean. The rancher didn't speak, but he rode closer to her now. Side by side, no longer a savior and a victim, just 2 people who had survived something ancient and refused to pass it on. That evening, back at the cabin, Sky knelt by the wall, where the bird with 1 wing had once been. She drew a new one, fully formed, rising. Beneath it, she added something else small and sharp, a broken sparrow finally resting. He watched her and for the first time, smiled. The next morning, the birds returned, real ones. They landed on the fence posts, on the sagging roof, on the rim of the old well where the first sign had once leaned. Sky watched them from the porch, her knees tucked under her, one hand wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She didn't speak, just smiled softly like someone watching a dream come back in pieces. He stepped outside, carrying the saddle blanket she'd left draped across the chair. Cold. She shook her head, then pointed at the willow tree by the edge of the yard. A nest, a small one, 2 fledglings inside. He looked, then looked back at her, and realized she'd never been the bird in the drawings. She'd been the branch, the thing everything else tried to break, and somehow didn't. Inside, the cabin had changed. The birds she'd drawn those black charcoal outlines, once hollow and trembling, were now repainted in color. He'd brought her ochre and faded blue from an old mining camp. She'd mixed the pigments with ash, spit, and crushed berries. Now the birds glowed in twilight, and all had 2 wings, above the hearth, where once hung nothing but dust. A new carving sat. The same words, but different meaning. White man learns. Sky had asked him to carve it, not for her, but for anyone who might come after. The curse had become a promise. He spent the next few days rebuilding the fence around the north pasture, not because it needed it, but because he finally had something to keep in. A life, not haunted, not cursed, just real. Sky planted tobacco in a small patch behind the barn, said it was for her mother, didn't explain, didn't have to. They didn't talk much about the tree, about the preacher who never made it back to town, or the vultures that stopped circling overhead like they'd lost their appetite for death. But sometimes in the quiet just before sleep, she'd hum a tune he didn't recognize, a lullaby in a language older than fences, older than revenge. He never asked for the words, he just listened, and every time, the last note made him close his eyes like it knew something he didn't. Weeks passed. The birds kept coming. Sky painted one last bird. above the window. It was flying straight into the light. No shadow beneath it. No weight. And at the center of its chest, where most hearts would be, she left the space blank, hollow, unfinished. When he asked why, she simply said, because the heart fills itself. Not all at once. Just a little every day. One morning, they rode out to the piñón tree again. Not to remember. To finish, Sky stood beneath the branch where she'd once been hung, then pulled a small bag from her saddle. Inside ashes, wooden pieces from the first sign, the one she never let him burn. She poured them in a circle around the tree roots, then pressed her palm to the bark, whispered something, and walked away. That was the last time they returned. The tree never sprouted leaves again, but birds began nesting in it, a sign of something ancient choosing to begin again. As summer melted into fall, Sky started writing in English, just one sentence a day, on scraps of bark, on the edge of his ledgers, sometimes with a brush, sometimes with her fingertip in the dust on the table. The same sentence, over and over, "We are not what they tried to make us." He didn't correct her spelling, didn't polish her grammar. He just folded each message, tucked it into a wooden box by the hearth, and said nothing. It was her gospel, and he believed every word. That winter, the two of them sat beneath the window, beside the fire. Snow covered the prairie like forgiveness. He turned to her and said, "I've been thinking." She raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" He nodded. "I never asked your real name." She stared into the fire for a long time, then said, "Sky was never the name they gave me. It's the one I found when they tried to take everything else." He smiled. "Then that's the one that matters." In the silence that followed, a bird, real this time, fluttered down the chimney shaft and landed on the mantel. A sparrow, whole, unbroken. Sky stood, walked to it, held out her hand, and the bird stepped into her palm without fear. She turned to him, and for the first time she said his name, softly, like it was a feather falling into place. And in that moment, the symbol that had haunted them, the sign, the birds, the fire, then the silence, became something else entirely. Not a memory, not a warning, but a home. Some wounds aren't meant to vanish. They're meant to change shape. This story isn't about revenge or even justice. It's about the courage to rebuild where something cruel once stood. In a world that teaches us to forget pain or turn it into hate, Sky did neither. She carried her past not as a weapon, but as a lantern, and by doing so, she lit a path for someone else to follow beside her. The rancher didn't save her. He chose not to look away, and in that choice, he found the parts of himself he'd buried under years of dust and silence. We are not what was done to us, and we are not what others failed to protect. We are what we choose to become in the quiet after. Forgiveness is not always a spoken word. Sometimes it's a bird with two wings drawn where pain once lived. And sometimes the deepest form of love is not rescue but staying, not saving but seeing, and not forgetting but remembering differently. Because sometimes the feather does grow back, and when it does, it doesn't fly alone.